Greetings and welcome there, academic proletariat, to this episode of the Fireside Chats, where we will be discussing Herbert Hoover and his Great Depression. Notably, we're going to be talking about the causes of the Great Depression here, so if you're looking more for effects, watch The Wizard of Oz. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start off by introducing you to Herbert Hoover. And so he was elected as president in 1928. And as we all know, the world lives by phrases, and here's a good one that indicates what kind of president Herbert Hoover is going to be. About his running opponent, so the person running against him for president, Al Smith, he said, Al Smith represents the sneering, ridiculing, foreign-populated city of New York and will open the way to card-playing, cocktail-drinking, poodle dogs, divorces, novels, stuffy rooms, dancing, evolution, Clarence Darrow, overeating, nude art, prize-fighting, actors, greyhound racing, and modernism. A couple of things to note here. First of all, I'm incredibly insulted by the reference to poodle dogs, seeing as though I have one. I'm also kind of enlightened by how you just throw a random person into a group of random nouns and verbs. That's always funny. I find that hilarious. But anyways, this indicates that Herbert Hoover is going to be more of the same with regard to 1920s presidents, just like Calvin Coolidge never talked and Warren G. Harding's was, didn't have a personality. So Herbert Hoover seems to be bringing more of the same, of sort of this austerity and old school way of thinking. Now, you might think that all the poodle dog owners out there would be incredibly insulted by Herbert Hoover, but check it out, they're not. You'll note that in the election in 1928, it is an electoral landslide. Al Smith, who is ironically a Catholic that carries the Deep South, that's sort of weird, but as we recall, Democrats like to vote for, the Deep South likes to vote for Democrats because, of course, they were the party of slavery. Lincoln was the party, or the Republicans are the party of Lincoln. The Southerners won't go there, so we have this electoral landslide. Now, right when his administration enters the White House, Herbert Hoover gets an issue. There's what begins bank runs in 1928, 1929, and 30. And bank runs are one of the major sort of outlying causes of the Great Depression. If you want to see a great example of a bank run, you can watch what happens to George Bailey as he's off to his honeymoon in the movie It's a Wonderful Life. It's a Christmas classic, but can be applied to any season. But anyways, George is the owner and overseer of a small bank in town, and he's going off to his honeymoon, and he sees that people are gathered outside the doors of another bank, and he rushes outside to see what was going on, and he realizes that everybody is going to withdraw their money from the bank. This usually happens as a result of somebody catching wind of one bank failing, and it sets off this mass hysteria that all the banks are going to fail. And so everybody rushes to their respective banks, tries to withdraw the money, which is of course bad because banks don't have enough money in them to cover all of the money that people have put in because they loan money out. And so you rush to get the money out of the bank in order to get yours back. George Bailey barely makes it in It's a Wonderful Life, and the United States barely made it under the reign of Herbert Hoover, but still it causes a mass panic. Now, another one of these outlying causes of the Great Depression is the fact that the stock market fails. And famous days that might get thrown around when talking about the Great Depression are Black Tuesday and Black Thursday. They happen in the same week, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average, or the blue chip stock market stocks, drop 25%. They lose a quarter of their value in just a couple of days. Now, Herbert Hoover responds to this by saying the fundamental business of this country, that is the production and the distribution of commodities, and it is on a sound and prosperous basis. That's after the Dow Jones loses 25% of its wealth. Not really that great of a thing to say. And then a few weeks later, he comes back with another awesome statement. Any lack of confidence in the economic future or the basic strength of business in the United States is foolish. Basically saying that anybody who's going in withdrawing their money from banks, anybody that's losing faith in the stock market is a fool. Okay, now a little bit about Herbert Hoover as the president and his philosophy. He believes in this idea of rugged individualism. He believes that people should lift themselves up out of whatever hardships they face. Probably indicative of the fact that he was born in that house. And there's my wife and Levi outside Herbert Hoover's birthplace. It's located just about 2.5 hours west of here in West Branch, Iowa. You can go visit it and get a postcard and turn it in for extra credit. But there you go. There's some Leviticus in the presentation for you. But Herbert Hoover was born in that house. He went to school in that school. Compare that. That's the whole school. Compare that to the school that you attend. And there, of course, I am with Leviticus, and he's happy to be learning some history. But so this is all sort of plays into Herbert Hoover's idea of what makes an individual. He made it. He went to Stanford on a full ride. He became an engineer and heavily involved in the mining industry. He traveled to China. He was there during the Boxer Rebellion and overcame that. He really believed that individuals should be responsible for themselves. So this whole boom and bust cycle of the economy, that's a natural thing. People should learn to pull themselves out of this. One of his big fears was federal relief. He didn't want the government to extend too much help to people who were in down times, because he thought that that would, of course, bring on socialism and would, of course, lead to people not doing things on their own. So, his responses to this economic panic that is set off. First, he believes in intelligent and voluntary cooperation. So, from business leaders, he asks that they cooperate. From state leaders and local governments, he asks that they provide for their citizens. From charities and religious organizations, he asks that they help people that are poor, indicating that if people have the smallest amount of relief, they can, of course, rise up if they really try. Okay? It's kind of like your teacher just giving you a book and saying, here, learn it. Some teachers actually do that. I feel bad for the kids who are in those classes, but whatever. Anyways, it's up to individuals to help themselves. Sure, you can get a little assistance here and there, but the individuals, they should be the ones behind it. Now, in the midst of all of this crisis, Herbert Hoover endorses a really, really bad idea. He thinks that as the American economy is sort of losing steam, that he's going to protect domestic businesses by raising tariff rates to their highest level in history. Well, you should stop me and think about this for a second. What happens when there's a huge tariff put on imported goods? World trade collapses. The idea is that you're going to be able to protect your domestic manufacturing, but if you put a high tariff on stuff, other people are going to put a high tariff on your stuff, and as America was making so much crap, they needed places to sell it, and nobody wanted to buy it because we had put a high tariff on their stuff. Effect, there it is. You'll see that from 1929, the tariff is implemented in 1931. World trade is totally plummets as a result of this. Very, very bad decision. So let's turn to more Herbert Hoover phrases. In October 1930, he says, the income of a large part of our people is not reduced by depression, but is affected by unnecessary fears and pessimism. Therefore, the economy is not bad because capitalism is a bad idea or it's structurally unsound, but it's because people are being sad. That's ridiculous. He argued that there was no special session of Congress that was necessary to deal with employment issues. Sure, 1/4 of the country can be out of a job, but that's not the government's fault. That's your fault, people. Get in a good mood, and then the economy will get better. Well, the people didn't respond too kindly to that, and you'll see that before the 1930 congressional election, Republicans held a overwhelming majority in the House and the Senate. And as after the election, not so much. They barely hold a majority in the Senate, and they lose their majority in the House. So you can see that Herbert Hoover's rugged individualism not really going over that well. Now, as sort of to reinforce his rugged individualism, because he didn't take to clues too kindly, he establishes what's known as the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, or the RFC. If you're ever writing an essay on the New Deal or the Great Depression, this is going to be something that you want to make. You want it to make in your essay. So this is where the government loans money to banks, hoping that they're going to loan to others and to big companies, hoping that those companies would then hire and invest people. This is called trickle-down or supply-side economics. It is a favorite of capitalism. 3 times in American history we have had a trickle-down or supply-side president. We're in the 4th time now. We'll see how it goes. And 3 times they've all ended in very serious depressions. So that just gives you kind of an idea on how that works. But anyways, the RFC was tasked with building railroads, improving infrastructure, and supplementing big companies, and the government was going to help them. Whereas it might have been a good idea for the government to, help the people, but in rugged individualism, And then Herbert Hoover makes probably the worst decision he could have made. There was a group of World War I veterans who, of course, this is about 15 years removed from the end of the war, who want their bonuses because they're poor. So they show up. Now, they weren't due to get their bonuses until probably 1945 or so. And so they show up in Washington early, and they say, we want our bonuses now because there's a depression on. And Herbert Hoover says, no, we'll show you exactly what he does in a second. But if you're looking for a synthesis to this, you'll remember that Coxey's army was, of course, the army of unemployed and poor workers that marched on Washington in 1893. This is, of course, indicating a change in people's perception of the government and what they should do. Coxey's army, of course, can be related to the Wizard of Oz. You know, if you had a good instructor who taught you all about that. Okay, so Herbert Hoover's troubles through pictures. There are unemployed people standing outside of a soup kitchen in 1930, which indicates that it's already getting bad. I told you before that the bonus army was not a good thing. Here's the bonus army on the Capitol saying that they want their bonus checks. Here they are camped out outside of the Capitol. And how does Herbert Hoover respond? Well, the only American way, with violence. He sends in troops, he sends in the National Guard, and even he puts it in charge of generals like Douglas MacArthur to do away with these veterans of World War I, and so they turn tanks on them, they use fire cannons to get them out of Washington, because Herbert Hoover thinks that they're giving the country and the Capitol a bad image, which they probably were, but let's be honest, what else were they supposed to do? Anyways, this is a total dagger in the heart of Herbert Hoover, and of course, you are all probably well versed in the whole Hooverville incident. People who couldn't afford to live in houses anymore put up these sort of makeshift shanties and called them Hoovervilles. People turned out the pockets in their pants and called them Hoover blankets. Or I'm sorry, called them Hoover flags. They slept with newspapers instead of blankets and called them Hoover blankets. They ate squirrels and called them Hoover steaks. It was just everybody was blaming Hoover, which is ironic because Hoover was, of course, blaming everybody else. Another big effect of the Great Depression that sort of occurs in the Midwest, I don't have time to get into all the details of it, but was the Dust Bowl. This was, of course, a massive drought that happened in the Plain States, largely the result of over-farming and cutting down of trees, and it really just blows over all of the Plain States and sends a lot of the people who lived in the plains, those former homesteaders, out west to places like California, where there were more job opportunities, not many, but more. Those people, ones that moved from Oklahoma specifically, were called Okies. So if you're making the travel from Oklahoma to California, you're called an Okie. Now, Herbert Hoover obviously runs for re-election in 1932, but you can imagine how that goes. I'll show you in a second. But the person running against him, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, says just before the election, the present administration has either forgotten or it does not want to remember the infantry of our economic army. These unhappy times call for plans that build from the bottom up and not from the top down, that put their faith once more in the forgotten man at the bottom of the pyramid. So that's sort of a shot at the Reconstruction Finance Corporation saying you got to get the relief to the people. There's an election map of 1932, and as you can see, Herbert Hoover in just 4 years loses by more of a margin than he won by over Al Smith in 1928. It's one of the great historical swings in American history. Okay, in 1932, you'll note that the congressional elections favored the Democrats again, both in the House and the Senate, and even more so in 1936. So by 1936, there are less than 100 Republican House members left, when just 6 years earlier, they had the majority. Now, Franklin D. Roosevelt, when he comes in, he tells the American people in his inaugural, I pledge to you, I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people. That's kind of an important phrase there, that whole New Deal thing. We'll talk about it next time. Let us, here, assembled, constitute ourselves prophets of a new order of competence and of courage. This is more than a political campaign. It is a call to arms. Give me your help, not to win votes alone, but to win in this crusade and restore America to its own people. This, of course, indicates that FDR is going to change government in a significant way, and he does so with the New Deal. Just to kind of foreshadow the New Deal for you here, FDR's response to the Great Depression is called the New Deal, and it's usually packaged up into 3 parts: relief, recovery, and reform. So relief is immediate relief to those poor people, those people in the soup kitchen, those bonus army veterans, people who were living in Hooverville, to get them some sort of money. Recovery is, of course, how do we get businesses up again? How do we get everything to work once more? And then reform is, how do we make sure that this does not happen again? Okay, so he is going to push through a collection of legislation that's designed to respond to this Great Depression and prevent future ones. All those who were alive in 2008 know that that didn't really work out, so he must have failed at one thing. We'll talk about that later. But anyways, the New Deal represents a fundamental shift in the relationship between the government and its citizens. Citizens start to look to the government in order to fix things. Okay, now I just want to sort of go over with you one big thing. Okay, causes of the Great Depression. So many people want to tell me that it's the stock market crash and that it's bank runs and things like that. Those are side things, okay? They are sort of peripheral causes of the Great Depression. There are two huge causes of the Great Depression. One is that there is no more consumer demand. People don't want to buy stuff anymore. When you don't buy stuff, there's nobody to employ because the places aren't making any money. That's pretty obvious. And that sort of results from the stock market crash, but immediately the lack of consumer demand is a huge, huge deal. And then the other one that, of course, results from bank runs is that the banks fail. So the failure of banks throughout the country, 1/3 in fact. So 33% of banks throughout America fail. These are the big boys. These are the things that caused it. It wasn't just the stock market went down one day and there was a depression on, okay? No more consumer demand, bank failures. It's all the time we have for today. Remember, this was all capitalism's fault, so down with capitalism. Peace.